Hello, and thanks for listening to the Conscious Diva podcast. I'm Tatiana, and joining me in this episode is Mike de la Rocha. Mike is a visionary strategist, acclaimed artist, and compelling voice for change. He is celebrated as one of the most influential change makers of our time, and he's graciously joining me to discuss his debut book, Sacred Lessons: Teaching My Father How to Love. His new book explores how inherited definitions of manhood profoundly impacted Mike's ability to connect with his father, his family, and ultimately himself. He invites readers on a transformative journey of self-discovery, forgiveness, and love. Some of the topics we discuss are the challenges that men face in expressing emotions and the impact that has on their relationships, how patriarchy and toxic masculinity shape the way men are taught to relate to others, and how men can learn to embody and access their own innate femininity. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being
Yeah,
here. I really
yeah.
enjoyed your book, Sacred Lessons. Have it
Oh,
here.
weird. Oh, you got
Yeah.
you marked it up too.
Oh yeah, totally. Always. Because you have some really important lessons obviously in here, hence the name. So the title of your book is Sacred Lessons: Teaching My Father How to Love. But it's not just about him, it's obviously your journey and
Right.
sacred lessons, right? And that's a really beautiful, love is a beautiful topic. So when you were writing this book, where did this all sort of, what was the motivation?
Well, I know the motivation was losing my dad propelled me on this whole healing journey. But I've been sharing that I actually wrote his story first. I spent the first 3 years of losing him, like listening, painfully listening to all these interviews he did when he was alive and interviewing like his first roommate in college and different people in his life. And I was actually writing a book in his voice, reflecting back on his life, the last 5 days he was alive. And, I got an amazing agent, and she went out to try to sell it, and no one bought that book. And so it was a lot. It was the catalyst, I think, because I feel like my dad in the spirit world was like orchestrating this whole thing. He was like, "No, mijo, you have to write your story." Like even though I was writing his voice, these were like, some things were exactly what he said, and some I was interpreting, right? But the bigger lesson for me was I was not dealing with the grief of losing my dad, and
Mhm.
I was hiding behind his voice. So then once I kind of like, started going to therapy more often and doing other things, that's what the book you're holding. That was the book that was birthed, was through that kind of healing journey of exploring and uncovering, like, why is it that I'm a lot more like my father than I recognized or acknowledged before the writing of the book. So
It's so amazing how in the book writing process, the book you feel inspired to write, or
yeah,
that we think wants to come through,
yeah,
actually ends up not being not
right,
being the one
yeah,
at all. I mean, like in a kind
exactly,
of a similar situation right now, actually.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's nice to hear that. I've heard it from a few other people, but I know that, okay, this something else had to happen. But so, okay, you have so many amazing points. And the reason I wanted to talk to you is that you're a male and you've gone on this incredible inner child journey. And I just felt right away, wow, that's an amazing, really important lesson to share. And we're in this time, as you well know, we've been in it for centuries, this patriarchal, situation globally. And you have such a beautiful message. So I wanted to just begin with inner child work for men. You mentioned in your book, you had read another book, Us Getting Past You and Me, and this concept of the adaptive child. So when you first discovered this, how did that resonate with you? Were you familiar with the concept of inner child work? I feel like perhaps many men aren't familiar with this phrase, and it might sound too feminine. We're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I was turned on to the concept of like, well, the inner child work really from my breath work teacher, Anna Lilia. So I have to shout her out. I talk a lot about her in the last chapter, but really just realizing that a lot of the wounds that I was trying to heal were from what happened to me as a young child. I think that book kind of provided a little bit more context, and then doing the work provided more. And then just in terms of the larger context of like you mentioned, patriarchy, it was a lot of like predominantly like queer women of color feminists that were influencing the way that I thought about myself in this issue. Bell Hooks, Gloria Anzaldúa, Audre Lorde, like these icons, right? And that was giving me a framework. But then in doing the work, I was like, well, I couldn't find a book like, say, for example, from a Chicano to a Chicano, or like from a male of color perspective, specifically on that. There's a lot of incredible books, obviously, out there. But I was like, well, what's something that I could give to my own son
Mm.
that was more accessible, wasn't too heady, if you will. And again, without judgment, but just like something that you could read. And that was really the impetus for it. And then realizing that I'm still that 12, 13-year-old child right now as a 40-year-old, you know? So like that is that will always be me. I don't want to lose that either, you know? And so Luis Rodriguez, a dear mentor of mine, always says, in
Mm.
order to truly heal, you have to go straight through the wound. And you know, the West teaches us to stay away from anything like that. And but all of our practices, culture practice, say you have that's part of the initiation. That's the ritual of it.
Yeah, yeah. And you write about your grandfather's story and your relationship to him and your
Yeah,
dad. And so I wondered, and of course you share about your relationship with your own son, but I
yeah,
wondered how having all these males and being a dad of a boy
yeah.
yourself, how has that impacted you? And
Mm,
obviously you share a lot of these things, and, and I've written so many questions around all of this.
yeah,
But yeah, if you wouldn't mind just sharing that.
yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think you know, growing up, the two men that had the most influence on my life in terms of how I viewed men and myself were my father and my grandfather, my abuelo, my father's father. I never knew my mom's dad because she never knew him. He left when she was really young, so I only always had one grandfather, and it was interesting to watch their dynamic. They had a very complicated relationship, and but they were both suffering in silence. They both wanted to communicate, but didn't necessarily have the language to do so. And I feel like, you know, my father, in reflecting like in a lot of the reasons why did he pass so young, he passed at 66, which is pretty young.
Yeah,
And
compared to your grandfather who died at 104, which was amazing.
it's a whole nother lifetime, you
Right.
know. And I think you know, there's multiple reasons for it, but I think at the crux of it was just the difficulty that men and my dad and me even have in asking for help,
Mm.
because the societal definition is that men have to tough it out. You can't be a burden on others. Um, can't be emotionally expressive. So we hold all of that in. And I just feel the you know, our bodies are breaking down by the weight, I say, of patriarchy, but also the weight of unexpressed emotion and feeling. And that ultimately was like the driving force for me, because I was like, I want to live longer than 66, God willing. But what are some of the things that I could do to do that? And how can I help other men? Because I've been engaged on this really beautiful 25 city tour across the country, and meeting men both in rural and urban areas, from everywhere from New York to Wisconsin and Chicago and everywhere in between. And what I can tell you is I haven't met a man yet that doesn't want his inner child and current self to be loved and held. And whether or not it is me articulating it or creating the space for us to articulate it together, it's been really profound to see. And it's not talked about. And so I hope and prayer is that we can normalize these kind of conversations like you and I are having, but also just normalizing and redefining strength as being able to ask for help is the most courageous thing that a person can do, regardless of gender. And so that's been really my driving force, because looking at my father and my grandfather and like, what's the lesson that I'm supposed to learn from that?
Yeah.
And I think it's that.
And so with learned behavior, I mean, were you seeing that when you became a dad? And obviously you were a stepfather first before you had your own son. So how, when you were a dad of your daughter is your stepdaughter, and then you have your own biological son. So was there a difference? Were you noticing these learned behaviors? these sort of masculine stories, were you noticing them in yourself when you had a son, or were you seeing them when you had your daughter, when you got married to your wife?
I think, I have to give a lot of credit to my partner, to my wife, because she's a type of person that keeps me honest and may tell me things that I don't want to hear, but I need to hear. So I had this co-pilot that was reflecting back to me, like,
Mm,
and also the truth is like even my breath work, like Anna Lilia, I was I don't want to say I was suspect, but I was arm's length. And then watching her commit to her own healing journey, watching her go to therapy, watching her go to breath, watching her take a break, that was really kind of the inspiration for me because I was seeing the change in her attitude and her behavior, but also just in her well being. And so she kind of opened the door for me to look in, and then obviously I had to walk in, but she walked in beside me and she checks me lovingly about, because these are all learned behaviors that the society conditions us and continues to beat down on us.
yeah.
And so she reminds me, hey, thought you want to be different than your father. And I'm like, dang, or different things. But so I think I was also very sensitive when I first started dating her because she had a child, Mayela, from a previous marriage. And so I was very intentional about that relationship. And then with my son, learning from what I did with Mayela, but it's a different dynamic. And but yeah, I think having a good co-pilot. And my father says on one of his emails to me that I've been reading on tour that he's so grateful to have my mother because she's the greatest teacher in the world. And that's kind of, when I read that, I was like, dang, that describes my own wife. And so it's been interesting to see the parallels. And I'm hoping that I listen more than my father did. But yeah, that's been super helpful for me.
I think that's really beautiful and amazing. Make sure you give yourself lots of pats on the back and hugs and stuff because that's amazing. Just coming back to inner child, when you're on your this tour currently for the book, are there men that are coming up to you and saying, "I've never heard of the term inner child before, and thank you for making that make me aware"?
I haven't been using that term when I've been speaking, but I've been contextualizing how I've gotten here and obviously talking about being a young child and growing up in Ventura and all of that stuff and how that impacted my perception of myself and of race and gender and everything else.
Mhm.
But what I have seen is a lot of men, like, I'll share, I was in Chicago all last week and there was this one man who was 61 years old. He came, he was deeply moved. And when I was reading, I could tell he put his head down. And I was signing books afterward, and he asked, "Can we talk afterward?" And I said, "Yeah, for sure." And so he was on a stairwell and he was weeping
Mm,
profoundly. And I asked permission, can I put my hand on his shoulder? He said, "Yeah." And I was like, "Hey, like, what's going on?" And just tries telling me about his decades of addiction and how he felt that he had let down his father, let down his parents. And I always invoke and invite my father to join me on stage or wherever I am and ancestors. And I always have a glass of water that I pour for libation. And I ask, hey, will you go with me to to finish this kind of ritual that we've been in, the ceremony? I was like, yeah. So we go outside, chose a tree, and I was like, talk to your father. He's here. And I looked at him in the eye. I said, if you said all this amazing stuff about your siblings, and you keep talking about, that part of you that was hurt and troubled and harmed. And I said, if I was your dad, I would just want you to know I'm so proud of you.
mm,
Probably more proud of you than I am of your other siblings because of what you've had or endured and overcame. And as soon as I said that, this huge wind came, just enveloped us. And then he then poured the water out. And I could physically see him lighter. And I guess what I'm trying to say is what I am saying is like the more that we share our individual unique stories and truth, the more we see how universal our stories are.
mhm.
And I may have particular identities or pathways in, but like that's the power of story as medicine. And that's why, the oldest technology is storytelling around a campfire or wherever you're from. because you see yourself in someone else and you see them in you. And I think that's been the biggest thing is allowing and modeling permission for men to feel and
Mm.
to just be. And he asked, "Can I give you a hug?" And I said, "Yes." And it's like you know, I've been holding this for 31 years, this weight, and I finally feel like I've forgave and it was forgiven. And that, you know, and that's the other piece I think is normalizing, at least for me in my belief system, you know, the veil between the seen and the unseen world is really thin if you tap into it.
Yeah.
You know, we've always like being of Mexican descent culturally, we celebrate Dia de los Muertos like that one day, but
Mhm.
it's not that day, it's every day. So like,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, that's why.
The honoring and the, yeah, for sure.
So like, I think in that moment, that story I just shared, it was all these things, all these reminders, all these reflections. Like your father is literally with us right now. We are both healing. All of us are healing together because I'm healing in the process with you healing, and that's kind of like the point, right? Like we heal in community. So
Mhm.
it's been amazing to be reflectors of each other on this tour with the men in particular.
So when you were growing up, did
Yeah.
you who were the influences in your life, the spiritual influences?
Mm.
You say in your book that your grandfather obviously reminded you of your cultural heritage,
Yeah.
but you also, I felt like when you had your really great, that close, your Muslim friend, Ibrahim, and
Yeah.
it felt like in the story that that was almost a spiritual awakening when he passed,
Mm.
that it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt like you then were guided to curanderos and just this other experience with nature. So I wondered, was that the first time, or throughout your life, your childhood, because of your heritage, had you been, you just mentioned, the Day of the Dead, but
Yeah.
this is something that happens every day, the honoring, the remembering, the rituals that we do in ceremony. And as you said, we feel into,
Yeah.
if you allow yourself and you attune, you learn to attune, you can absolutely feel into all that is every day.
Yeah. 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 I have to give a lot of credit for my spiritual foundation is my mother for sure. You know, she worked multiple jobs for me to go to Catholic school. I always say I'm a recovering Catholic. Um, but the underpinnings, right? The spirit of it, I still really, really hold true. And I think in terms of my spirituality, I was listening to this podcast on being, and they were interviewing Richard Rohr, and he
Mm,
was saying about like life is sometimes it's not a dichotomy, but you can break it up into two parts. And first part of life is where you're really like you're driven by ego and like it's either this or nothing. In the last half of life, you're realizing that all of that didn't really mean anything, and that it's really about like some deeper connection and relationship with self and the land and spirit. And I feel like the last 20 years I've been very intentional about remembering my cultural practices and my spirituality from Mexico in
mm,
particular and Africa. I think Ibrahim's passing was one of the strongest reminders of how quickly this life goes, this physical life that we have. Him and I would talk about spirituality all the time. Him from being a Muslim and me being this more spiritual person, and you know we would see always the parallels and similarities in the way that humans have reinterpreted religion. Unfortunately, is like we forget that regardless of what text or faith you are, the foundations are all really kind of the same, based on love and you
mhm,
know this spirit of service and what have you. But I think Ibrahim kickstarted me to remember my love of nature because he
mm.
was such a badass environmentalist. You know, when I was gonna say one of my favorite things about this whole thing is, you know, is having people meet my dad and Ibrahim in particular, because like they're alive. Like it's like I'm introducing you to both of them, even though they're not physically here, but they are spiritually here, right? And
Yeah.
it's so beautiful to have their names said out loud and remembered, and that's like the biggest gift for me is those.
Mm, yeah, we bow to them. Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
beautiful. So, okay, coming back to the real man, in quotes.
Uh,
What is this idea of the real man? What does it mean or
yeah,
represent?
I think we're in a crisis of masculinity in real time. I think we're redefining everything. I think traditionally, the way I've been raised or taught or conditioned is a real man provides for his family, a real man protects, a real man's worth is really defined by his productivity. And I think the society we're living in right now, all of those things are being thrown upside down with gender roles changing, with the disruption of the economy or economic uncertainty. A lot of the tenets of what defined a man, this current age is like literally it's breaking it down. And I always say, every other Thursday, I have the extreme honor and privilege of co-facilitating a men's circle in Altadena, Pasadena, with men that lost their homes in the fire. And this has been such a profound awakening because everything I just shared about what defines a real man. Well, if you lost your home and your job was burnt down, so you can't provide and or protect, are you a man, right? And to me, we're redefining it in real time. I think, race and gender are both social constructs. So while this book is kind of rooted in a father-son relationship, it's really about masculine and feminine energies.
Mhm.
Now we both have those, and depending on what you believe too, like this is we're entering into a different age too, age of Aquarius, age of feminine spirit rising, which makes sense why all this really harmful, toxic ways of being in the manosphere, if you will, are happening. But what I've learned is we need to find new language and new ways to call in rather than call out men. And I feel the last few decades, we haven't done a good enough job as a society. And when I say this real man, if you look at the statistics, right, this image of what we're supposed to be that is unattainable in this current environment, I would argue, is why the rates of suicide, depression, loneliness for men are as high as they've ever been. And for me, this book journey is, yes, highlighting that because this is something that needs to be addressed, but also highlighting the men at the men's circle,
Mhm.
highlighting that man I just shared who was 61 and had the courage to break down in front of me and release what he was holding in. Because when we don't release, that's when our bodies start to break down, but that's when we start acting in unhealthy, harmful ways to self and others. And there's a lot of incredible work happening around the country. That's the one thing I know for sure. But we don't have access to it or know about it. And when we don't know that, then that's what makes too many men feel like we're the only one that feels a particular way. And that's how capitalism or patriarchy feeds off of that isolation. And the more that can create community and share these kind of sacred stories, that's such a profound way to help heal families and generations. And
Mhm.
so that last part that I just shared, that to me is the redefining of manhood in real time. And men that are able to be in those kind of circles or those spaces, they leave transformed and also able to rely on others for their well-being.
And I also think, and I've been thinking a lot about this lately,
Yeah,
when, particularly for men, this happens for women too, when
yeah,
you're a child and your needs are not met, and in the case
yeah,
of boys, little young toddlers, being told not to cry, to toughen up, not getting picked up and held, or perhaps the father is telling the mother or the other caregiver, don't pick him up, let him cry it out, let him whatever. It teaches that child that their needs are not met, won't be met. And so as they grow up and become men, and I witnessed this in my own relationship with my husband, who's going to soon be an ex-husband, and I've tried to talk to him a lot about this, but it's another reason why I thought I've said to him, you need to read this book when I'm done. You really, I'm going to give you this book.
mhm,
You're going to learn
yeah,
so much from it. It's going to be great for you. But I could see in him and in other men that there's a reliance on the partner in the relationship to
Yeah.
needle their meat, to do all of those things so that they can go out into the world and, in quotes again, be the man, be the one
Yeah.
who's all of this stuff, because they come home and there's an expectation of, oh, someone else is going to, she or he or whoever's taking, going to just take care of all these other things that I don't have to think about. So I wonder, in your experience with your own personal experience and with what
Yeah.
you're now sharing and teaching, have you thought about how, when boys are being raised, how perhaps if their needs aren't met, that might, affect them growing up?
Well, absolutely, for sure. And I think a lot of what's connected to that is that we do not do cultural rites of passages or initiation like we used to do. And so, the initiation phase for a lot of young men now is the video game, or what I'm
Mm,
saying, like the social media, or what have you.
yeah.
There are these worlds that to them are real, so I'm not downplaying it. But we used to have very particular ways of guiding young boys in particular through adolescence to adulthood to eldership.
Hmm.
And in that process, though, you recognize needs, to your point of needs. And I think right now it's compounded because the expectation that we're supposed to provide so much that, arguably you could say most people in the United States, their needs are not being met, like, period,
Yeah.
regardless of background. But then when you add all these layers of what you're expected to provide, and we too many of us unfortunately take out our pain of unmet needs on those closest to us, and we don't have that vocabulary or the understanding of, like, no, what do you, that's not how shared parenting or shared relation is supposed to be, you know? And there's not outlets for that release and that belonging, that sense of belonging and coming together. And the truth is, if you look at when you're a young man, and who do you look up to as your role models, right? And oftentimes people looked up to whether rock stars or presidents. And right now, folks that are taking up a lot of airtime is the current president and current, like, billionaires that, again, 99% of folks aren't going to reach that place. And it's clouded in this lie, if you will. And folks that don't take accountability or are held accountable for what they do, right? And
Hmm.
so, again, like, if that's the image, and you need to hold on to something for your own sanity, that's what I think, that's the breakdown right now. Because then what ends up happening, like what you're sharing, is like we have a breakdown of the relationships that matter the most to us.
Yeah.
And it oftentimes starts with our own relationship with ourselves. So
Hmm.
our relationship with self breaks down, and of course it makes sense the relationship with everyone else around us. And that's where I think for me the biggest awakening is, like, how am I going to learn to love my partner or love someone else if I don't even love myself, because my needs weren't met as a child, or my needs aren't even being met now, or like you said, like, I learned early on my needs won't be met, so therefore why should I give someone else what they're asking because mine aren't going to be met? It's like this
Hmm.
dangerous downward spiral. And that's where I found circle's been so profound, because this isn't unique to me or you, it's like normal, but
Hmm.
it's taboo to talk about it. Circle with men, and they can hear from someone that's going through a painful divorce, or someone that's going through a painful traumatic experience, and see yourself in that. Like, you're learning, because at the end of the day, we are all hardwired for connection. We all want to belong. We all want this sense of love, whether or not we articulate or verbalize it, like, from infancy to now, right? And so that's like the most transformative moments I've seen, is having those really raw, honest, non-judgmental conversations with other men about, like, I messed up here, and I'm ashamed to admit it, and I'm ashamed to take accountability, so then I don't, and then things break down. How did you do it? Oh, well, I'm on my second, third wife, and I'll tell you, learn from me. Like, if I had to do it all over again, you know, like, but we don't have those spaces as much,
Yeah.
you know?
Hmm. And of course, you also share in your book what's being promoted in society. You talk about when you took your son to the WrestleMania event and what that experience was like for him. And then you realized, not realize, you were already aware of this, but just talk a little bit about that moment for you. And in that environment, were there also a lot of women at the WWE? Like, I mean, I'm sure there
Oh
are, but
yeah,
I've never been to
yeah,
one.
sure. Yeah, there was a lot of women. Ironically, I think the average age were people my age, you know, bringing their children, which was like this could be considered a rite of passage, right? In this environment that was some of the most aggressive.
No, it's all about showing off the man, like, right? The physique, the strength, the this, the that. Like, I'm such a macho. I'm gonna jump off the side and squash another man.
Yes, yes, and this is my point. Yes, 100%. And it was some of the most homoerotic, tender moments you see of two men. My favorite wrestler coming down in literally all pink dominatrix. But because he's going to do all that very like jump off the top of a cage and body slam you, then it affirms it's okay that he's so flamboyant, for example, right? Or it's socially acceptable in that same space where you're literally beating each other, but then at the end you can embrace naked, by the way. You're only wearing like
Yeah, those little pants,
trousers.
undies.
Yeah, in embrace, and the crowd goes crazy. And some of this is like primordial. You know what I'm saying? Because like it's okay. Like like, and that's where we don't talk enough about the other part, that and part.
It was sweet. Sorry to interrupt you, but it was
Yeah.
sweet how you talked about your son getting emotional and
Yeah.
the other dad that was there.
Oh,
And it also reminded me a little bit of the ancient Greek, the original Olympics when they were
yes.
the original wrestlers, right?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. And that's why I think we are changing. As much as like the media wants to manipulate us with algorithms or what have you, that things don't get me wrong. We have a lot of work to do. However, that example of me looking over and seeing another man embracing his son when my dad taking me maybe would have given me a pat on the back or just not even knowing what to do, that shows progress because we didn't tell our kids to stop crying. We just held them and we were meeting that need that we're talking about. And that's what I'm kind of getting at. I think the more that men can be in space with each other, the more we can call in men, the more that we can be better fathers and partners, like then the unmet need of us as children will be met in real time. So I was meeting my needs as a child while I was providing my son with what he needed in that moment.
Yeah, that's
And then
beautiful.
seeing someone else, like, God, that was amazing,
Yeah.
because it wasn't isolated. And then we both kind of looked at each other. I mentioned this book, like, I lock eyes with the other father and we just nod, but not in like thank you and assurance and we're doing the right thing. You don't have to be embarrassed.
Yeah, that's cool. And do you mind just sharing? Because some people might be wondering, why were the boys crying at a wrestling?
Oh yeah, yeah. They were crying because my son's favorite wrestler at the time was Cody Rhodes, and he was trying to win the Ultimate Heavyweight Championship belt. And it was a storyline that had been years in the making. He was a legendary. He was the son of a legendary wrestler, so everybody thought this guy was going to win at WrestleMania, and he had a shirt on, and this epic battle, and obviously him and the other young child, that was their favorite wrestler, and he ends up losing. So that's why my son was crying because his wrestler they came to see won the championship lost. And unbeknownst to me, I didn't know how deeply invested he was in the outcome till I looked over and noticed he was crying.
Hmm. That's really sweet.
Yeah.
So then, what does the divine feminine mean to you?
Yeah, I think the divine feminine for me, there is no feminine without the masculine. So Divine feminine for me is really tapping into the full spectrum of all the emotions that we have. Robert Bly has this book, and he talks about how we have bifurcated the feminine and masculine the same way we bifurcate genders.
Mm.
We were saying, we talk about Mother Earth and Father Sky, for example, but in certain Celtic traditions and other traditions, it's also Mother Sky and Father Earth. And when I read that, I was like, wow, that's true, you know? So me, the divine feminine though, is embracing all the spectrum, but also really redefining this idea that vulnerability is strength, and also redefining manhood as tenderness, as the ability to release, because we oftentimes think releasing is a feminine quality.
Mhm.
And to me, I'm trying to just weave, because life is just weaving and circles, and so that to me is how I'm trying to really focus in embracing the divine feminine within me. And the biggest example that would be, it's been very difficult for me to cry in public.
Mm.
And before the tour started, I would have moments like when I first saw the book, for example, and my wife was filming me, and it's just about to break, and the little voice in me was like, "Don't, bro, you're on camera. You better stop." So I stopped, and this tour has taught me how to not stop, to let it go all the way through. And
Mm.
it doesn't. It's not manufactured. It's not something that I like plan, but like 2 out of 3 times when I'm reading an excerpt from the book at a book talk, specifically if it's a chapter where it's an email or a letter from my dad, I can't control it. And I've realized that that is the powerful part of the feminine in me, that's allowing other men to also embrace their own divine feminine. And all of us feel so much lighter when that happens, because that allows permission to the other man to also shed tears. So,
Yeah, to be vulnerable and to really share
yeah,
and show that, yeah, you're in a safe place. It's okay. You've
yeah,
tuned into your feelings, and that's a memory that you're being reminded of the love you had for your dad. And that some of those letters in the
exactly.
book are really the emails that the exchange. That's the only time really he could say "I love you" in a lot of right. Like that was he couldn't
Oh,
actually ever say it out of his mouth.
yeah.
So I mean, this is obviously secular lessons teaching my father how to love.
Hmm.
Do you feel like you taught him how to love?
I believe this whole journey of writing the book has allowed both my father and myself to learn how to express verbally the words "I love you." Because when he said that in those emails, he says, "I love you, mijo," for example. When I say that out loud, it's as if he's saying it.
Mm.
So he is. That's the irony. That's the irony of this whole beautiful dance relationship with our ancestors. Is I'm reading his words to me out loud, so therefore he is telling me out loud. And I strongly believe that I'm healing for myself, my son, and my father at the same time, and my grandfather. They say in our cultural traditions that we're not only healing for self, but for past ancestors and future ancestors.
Yes.
And I truly believe that. So we are teaching each other how to love and how to express it in real time. So,
And what about your brother? Has he read your book and does he feel the same way?
yeah, he has. This book has brought my brother and I closer than we've been our whole lives. Before I turned in the final manuscript, one of the things I was most looking forward to and most not looking forward to was reading my brother's chapter to him, because I wanted him to share his thoughts before I turned it in. And I remember going to his house. I drank every bottle of alcohol I could find, literally. And we went in his backyard. We lit a fire, and I read a couple other chapters to like warm up to his. And we're reading this, and we're crying. And then finally, I said, I want to read your chapter. So I read his chapter to him, and we just embraced in our tears. And I'll never forget the next day. The way this chapter ends, the Saint and the Wild Man chapter you're referring to, that text he sent me, no matter what happens, we'll be okay because we have each other. Those are words my inner child wanted to hear my whole life. And I'm sure his wanted to. But he checked me because he's like, I'm more than than the chapter I read to him that night. And when he said that, I was like, you're right. Like, we are both the saint and the wild man. And
Mm.
there's aspects of all of that. And we have to love and embrace all of that. And coming to the realization that more than any other person on this planet, my brother reflects me and I reflect him more than anyone else is so deep because that's a product of the love of our parents, but also a product of our love of each other. And that's one of my favorite chapters because it happened in real time. Like our healing and deepening of our relationship was teased out through the writing of the book, but in particular that chapter. And so now we call each other more, and I don't have to get wasted off of alcohol or whatever to say, hey, I love you, bro. I love you too. And that's like the full circle. And that's where it's like my father does know how to love now because look, his children are modeling that for him and our own children.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
And are you sharing that story with the men's circles, or how are you teaching them, or perhaps because you talk about teachable moments too in your book, guiding men to tap into their feminine sides, especially when this culture we live in where you're considered, not a man or whatever your masculinity is more important. How do you teach men to really tune into that side so they can the softness of the heart, really?
Well, I have to give a lot of love and gratitude and appreciation to Yancey Cummins, who is a co-facilitator. He's co-founder of an amazing organization called Hands in the Soil in Pasadena, Los Angeles area. And one of the things I've really learned the most from Yancey is so much of the pain and trauma that we store is in our bodies.
Hmm.
All the isms are body based. Like we hold on to the pain. And so he has taught me how important it is to breathe, but also to release like physically. And so we invite men into this sacred circle through somatic practice, but also just, we're not therapists. So I statements, non judgment, non shame, and letting people just have the space to share. And what I realized in just that simple act, it transcends gender, but also is the full embracing of all the energies that we're talking about, both the masculine and the feminine. And for me, I'll name it. Like I'll share things that are really personal to me as a way to model the safety of the space, but also the need for me to do that because in doing so allows other people permission if they choose to also share something. And in that sharing, like I said, we find the medicine in the story and we find community because we're not alone. And the proof that it works is the fact that consistently, 13 to 20 men are coming every other Thursday. And, we scale because it's different men, but it's always this magical number there. But those men are all part of families. So it's like we're impacting not just a person, we're impacting their children, their partners, their families. And it's been beautiful to witness even them making lifelong connections and relationships with each other, like hanging out outside of the circle, for example. So, and then Yancey's just masterful. I just got to put it out there. Like, he will do these exercises that really push us to deconstruct what we've been taught. Like, everything from touch. We ask permission, but even just touching a man's like leg in a circle, like what? Like deep things or looking at someone in the eye. Like we don't do some of this stuff because of fear that we've been taught or whatever, but we break down all those things in the sacredness of the circle.
Mhm.
And that allows you just to be more accepting of who you are and all your identities.
Very empowering, I can imagine for a lot of men. And you're right, it's like super transformative, and it affects everybody in their lives gets to benefit from that healing work, and everybody in their bloodline gets to
Exactly.
benefit as well.
Yep.
So you have these other chapters that are really beautiful, the wisdom of children.
Yeah.
What have you learned from children?
So much. They say that children choose their parents, at least that's what I believe.
Mhm.
And they also say that children have a special bond and connection with elders because one is entering from the spirit world and one is going into the spirit world.
Mm.
And I can say that my children have definitely known what parts of me I have to work on still. What, we call them what buttons they push. So they push them because that's what they're supposed to do for me to evolve. My children have definitely taught me, like my daughter, like I said, patience or just how to be a better person. But also I've seen my father was able to be emotionally expressive, verbally expressive only with his grandchildren, even more so than his own wife to my mom. He was just so loving, like hugging, kissing, letting them jump around them, holding their hands, like, and it reminded me that every person, regardless of age or identity, that's what they really want. They want that. But it's for him, it was only socially acceptable for him to do that because it's socially acceptable for grandparents to be affectionate with their grandchildren.
Mm.
And my brother and I, when we would watch this, we'd be like, the Ernie's going, I want that right now. Like,
Like, what's going on?
what's going on? Like, obviously, you're capable of doing it, and you love to do it, and want to do it, and so that's the wisdom I've learned from children is the same I learned from elders. Is like, the children come in with such ashe and come in with such gifts and talents, and that's why I say I want to remember. I never want to lose the inner child in me because that inner child's holding that flame that I was brought into this world to do. And I feel like the elders, because they're going into spirit world, they recognize the flame in the child, but also the flame in them that maybe burnt out or maybe is still like flickering. But they want to make sure to love up on that child so they can continue that journey and that message that they were brought here to do, their purpose.
That's right. When my kids were little, my son's now 21 and my daughter's 16. And when they were toddlers and they're first starting to show you what they're guided, what they're
Yeah,
gravitating towards. And my husband would say, was trying to influence our son in particular to do
yeah,
other things, things that he was really into. And I
right.
would always say, let him be. He
Yeah,
does. He's showing us that that's not his thing.
yeah,
He's literally showing you his body, like, maybe he's not supposed to be playing soccer. That's not his thing, football, It's
yeah,
just because you grew
exactly.
up in a full Italian household and that's what it was, and you're into, well, it doesn't mean that's his thing. And he's very musical. And I said, just let him express, like, let him just, you don't force, because then he'll lose
Right,
that, or it gets suppressed and it
right.
may not come out till later in life because he's doing what he thinks he should do for you. So it is really important that we embrace our
Mhm.
children and witness them as their own individuals so we can just see, who are you? And then that's where for me anyway, the lessons have been, because I'm like, and then they show you, like you said. And we don't teach that in schools. We don't teach, in schools also say you must do this. You've got to be a mathematician. You have to do science. You can't be creative. And that's really sad. We lose so much in that.
I think one of the biggest sacred lessons of children and life is we don't control anything. And that's where I think the breakdown in masculinity is happening, is we don't have control over anything. And that's the power of death or grief, is it reminds you really quickly that we can't control, that the only constant is change, is impermanence, right? And that's a hard thing to grasp in the
Mhm.
West in particular.
Yeah, we just don't teach that. And we don't teach how to tune into our innate gifts.
Yeah.
So in your chapter on faith,
Yeah.
what is faith?
Great question. The eternal question. For me, faith is having a deep belief in something bigger than myself and bigger than us. And knowing that I am connected to whatever that is, and that if I can tap into that faith, that I will always be okay. Back to this question of control. My faith knows that I can't control the outcome, but I know I will be okay. And the faith is, it's been my driving compass to be risk taking, to know I can jump and the net will appear because I know something will catch me. And it may not be what I think. Like I think that's how we even started the conversation. Like in the writing process, we were talking about, like we may have a whole like
Mhm.
outline and idea, but I have faith that whatever's supposed to happen is going to happen. And it may look completely different than what I thought in the beginning, but I know I'll be a better person of it and I'll grow from that. And so I find extreme amount of direction for my spirituality that's rooted in a deep faith in something that connects us all and that's bigger than any one person.
Yeah. Is it the same as trust?
I think so. I think my faith in humanity is based on the trust that if we truly love each other, then we can. heal the child that's been wounded. I have trust in humanity despite what may be happening in our society right now because I have faith that we are good.
And so how can people find out about you? And where are your circles? Are you
Yeah,
only doing them with your book tour, or are they in
yeah,
California? Are they online?
yeah. So, well, if you go to sacredlessons.com, it has the book tour schedule. I'd say one out of every two book talks that I do, there's a healing circle. Every other Thursday, we do them in Los Angeles. You can go to dinaheals.com for that. And then you can follow me online at Mr. Mike Della Rocha, MrMikeDelarCha, Mr. Mike Della Rocha. And that's kind of where I'll share a lot of things as well. Yeah, like I look forward to being on as many wonderful conversations and circles with anyone and everyone that I can meet in this lifetime. So
Yeah, amazing. Doing such great work in the world and
thank you.
awesome. What a gift for to men, right? And
Yeah,
to your son and also your daughter, but your brother and all the men in your life and all the other men who are really struggling with needing to connect with the truth of who they are,
correct.
right?
Coming home to ourselves. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you and all that you do and all the energy that you put out into the world. I know we need more of this, and so I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a vessel for these kind of important exchanges. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much.